Hi everyone, I'm Ross John Fortuna. Welcome to today's GovFocus. As the Pentagon moves CMMC into its final rule implementation phase, firms are preparing for a transition from self-attestation to an era of required third-party verification. Today, we're going to talk about this new era of CMMC compliance with Michael Moore, CIO of Carahsoft, Derek Phillips, lead CMMC certified assessor, and Matt Wolf, VP of Technology at Virginia Tech's Applied Research Corporation. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Derek, I want to start with you. What are the most common readiness gaps that you are seeing as firms move from level one and the self-assessments to preparing for a level two C3PAO audit?
Yes, and I would say it's kind of challenging to narrow it down. It's a long list, but I'll do my best to do the top picks. I would say one of the biggest challenges I'm seeing is organizations have trouble identifying the sensitive information that's in scope for their CMMC Level 2 certification assessment, so that controlled unclassified information, CUI. Unfortunately, even though it should be marked, a lot of times it's not marked. Or a lot of times organizations are creating the CUI in the performance of their contract. So being able to identify where the CUI comes into the organization and all the different departments or who handles that CUI is a real challenge for a lot of organizations. And the way we help them overcome that challenge is by starting with doing a data flow diagram, helping them understand, okay, from the RFP or the solicitation, usually is that first entry point of CUI into the organization, all the way to the final deliverable, really just whiteboarding it out, mapping it out from start to finish, who handles that CUI from the facilities to the people to the technology. So that usually is a really good exercise as a starting point for the organizations. Outside of identifying the sensitive information, I would say other um, challenges that organizations are encountering is their supply chain. With CMMC, it's all about the information and the flow down requirements. So wherever that CUI flows, then the requirements follow. And if organizations are using a lot of vendors, now they have to start looking at their vendors and think and identify, are we sharing CUI with our vendors? And if so, now those vendors need to demonstrate their compliance to us because we have to do our due diligence to make sure that they're safeguarding that CUI. And a lot of our clients are having some tough conversations with their vendors they've been sharing CUI with them for years without the actual requirements flowing down to them. And now under CMMC level 2, that's no longer optional. So we're seeing more organizations kind of, again, having those tough conversations to decide if they are going to continue doing business with those vendors or if they need to look elsewhere for vendors who are going to adhere to the CMMC requirements. So I would say those are my top two.
Yeah, those are certainly pretty big. I know, Michael, you in your role at Carahsoft, you see this from the vendor and the contractor from all different vantages. But what gaps are you seeing in the technical, the cultural, all those kinds of aspects of CMMC compliance?
So on the technical side, probably the first thing that comes to my mind is there's a bit of a misconception that this is purely a technical problem that rests on the IT staff. And I think in reality, it's upon the entire organization to buy in and put in policies, practices, and procedures and observe them every day to achieve compliance and maintain compliance. So while the IT staff does have a critical role in it, it is a systemic or an organizational challenge, and it's a practice for the entire organization to adhere to. And then to pile on with what Derek said, the marking of documents, I think there's been some slow adoption or at times confusion, but we've seen documents mislabeled or with legacy tags, as well as the overmarking of documents. And I've encountered instances such as an email with a signature that says contains CUI, regardless of the content of email. So some blanket marking to perhaps be overly cautious. But I think it serves all parties best to appropriately and consistently classify or label your documents. So then we can make sure that all the right policies and handling and procedures are followed from there.
Overclassification is something that Geez, national intelligence directors have cited, defense secretaries have cited it as all it seems to be a perpetual thing in this environment. But balancing that is something I do want to talk about in a moment. But in the meantime, Matt, I wanted to get your perspective on some of this. Um,
Sure.
because of the controls required for CMMC level two, there's a certain amount of compliance tax that organizations can face. Your advantage is very different than other people's, and I want to get a full throated or full rounded discussion on here. So, how do you create um, R&D, innovation, academic collaboration without getting those compliant taxes caught up in the system?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and I'll say that I don't think you can really avoid the compliance tax because I mean it's just going to be a cost that you have to undertake, and it's one that obviously we have to accept if we want to continue to do business with the government. But we've taken an approach where we try to minimize the initial tax, if you will. We were faced with a choice when we knew we were going to be having you down this road to either look at, do we create an enclave where we have a limited portion of our network and communications and IT management structure that is CUI compliant and falls within that CMMC guideline. And then the rest of the organization, is outside of that enclave, and that allows us to keep the things that need to be protected and managed appropriately within that enclave. Provides us the additional access controls to do that, and also just in terms of getting certified, it scopes it down, right? So we're not having to write policies that are encompass the entire enterprise, but just within that enclave. And as Derek had mentioned, understanding your data workflows and all of that is an important piece of that. What goes into that enclave, what comes out of that enclave, and how do you verify access under that? So we've chosen to use a third-party vendor. We do recognize that over the long run we probably will have to migrate to an enterprise level compliance as more and more of the contracts come out with the requirement. But in the interim, I mean, it allows us tremendous flexibility. So like I said, we can maintain our normal communications with academic partners, those who either are not needing to access the CUI or have an inability to do that, whether it be a vendor or whatnot. We don't have to get them caught up in, hey, make sure you send an email to this into this enclave if you're going to send us some CUI material. So it's working for us. I mean, we're a relatively small organization, so it hasn't impacted our ability to speed things up. But then to tack on what Michael said, I mean, I look at it as you have access control, or access to the information. Do you have a need to know the information? But I think everybody in the corporation at least needs to understand it, what CUI is, because we have run into instances where a government client, we have a non-CUI required contract, but they send CUI, whether it's because they're passing on a document that they received and they thought it'd be relevant. But if we have people who are not generally and routinely using CUI, they need to know what to do in those circumstances. So that cultural shift to get everybody to at least understand the broader context of CUI management is quite important.
Best practices on CUI. Since we're here, let's talk about it. Derek, how do you do that? How do you make that work?
Yeah, and I would say it really is fundamental in terms of trying to communicate to especially senior leadership and just the organization in broad terms of whether CMMC can be accomplished by IT. That's a common misconception, or I think that applies to any compliance or regulatory requirements as around IT. It's just, okay, let's throw this over the fence to the IT department and let us know when we're compliant. And yeah, it does not work that way with CMMC. At level two, you have 14 domains, and all those domains, a lot of them are not IT related. You have domain around awareness and training, like we're talking now. That is so important and commonly overlooked. And within the awareness and training, you have role-based training. So the organization is responsible for training those administrators and other people who have a role in CMMC to the standard per their role. And I would say that's a big one I see missed. Other than that, it's just understanding that CMMC is a culture shift. It's not about convenience. It's not about the way we've always done things. It's a new day. So really being able to help the stakeholders understand that they all play a vital role in CMMC compliance. And Matt brings up a really good point. Even if an individual within an organization is not intended to handle CUI, they still should understand in the case where there is CUI spillage or accidental handling of CUI where they would know what to do or who to report it to. That's critical.
Yeah, things happen.
Yeah.
CUI ends up in people's
Human
inboxes
error.
or on their desk or whatever. That's life. What can you say? Carahsoft sits at the intersection of the vendors and the federal government. So how are you advising all of your various partners and all the people you work with to manage these trickle-down costs of CMMC?
Well, as you know, given Carahsoft's position in the federal marketplace, we have a number of partners that are going to need to get CMMC certified. The cost of CMMC, I would argue, view it as an investment more so than a cost. And this is a way for companies to give our customers commitment that we are going to handle their data and we're going to secure the supply chain, leaving no weak links in the interest of national security. The cost is dynamic and high for companies, but it's aligned with best practices that we should all be doing. That being said, there is, of course, a cost to achieving and maintaining compliance. But Carahsoft does sit at the intersection of the vendors, and we have a number of vendors and service providers that we work with that have technology solutions expertise in achieving CMMC compliance, including NinjaOne, who we leveraged in key roles as part of our own compliance stack. We're able to leverage these relationships to help connect our partners with each other and to help them achieve certification. And also, we're able to leverage these relationships in how to do so economically using the best advice, the best technology, automations, and policy and procedures.
Procedures, that brings me to the compliance versus checklist thing. Earlier, I did a little, done and dusted hand motion. Matt, I want to start with you on this to ask about the checklist-based CMMC posture to the one that focuses on continuing assurance, because that is something that now we're moving toward.
Yeah, absolutely. The checklist approach, it makes it easy to do and to track, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problem that the government and we should all be trying to address, which is actually, securing the information. And so that checklist approach, and which checklist are you using? I mean, I'll just a quick story. We went back to our initial self-assessment and we just looked at the 110 controls, and our IT manager was looking at that, just sort of went through 110 and, checked the box or didn't check the box and did a self-assessment. And of course, the score was way higher than what an independent third party came back with, because underneath those 110 are many, many more things you need to look at. So now I would say not all checklists are the same. So make sure you start with the right one. And there's a certain amount of internal validation you have to do. So do I really have what in place what this checklist is asking for? And as Michael mentioned, the automation, that becomes a big part of it. That helps keep things going. It allows, consistent, it's almost like audit in real time. You're constantly monitoring your systems, and not just the systems in general, but consistent with the CMMC controls that have to be there. So, that's an important piece of it. The reality of it outside of the checklist and what isn't covered in the checklist is more on that what if and having those what if scenarios. And we've actually rolled portions of this into our business continuity planning and everything else. So, what do we do under certain circumstances, and how does that impact what's within not just the enterprise, but within that enclave as well? And do we have to have additional measures in place? I think that pretty much, you have to be ready for anything at this point. So,
I know this is something that we've sort of danced around sort of generally, but that it does sort of come from a top-down notion. So I do want to end on this general question, which is about paper versus practice. And I want to get everyone's perspective. Michael, I'll start with you. This notion that compliance on paper looks pretty different than the actual practice? How should contractors, whether they're big, they're small, they're medium, whatever size, whatever industry, however they're dealing with it with CMMC, how should they prepare for translating that compliance on paper into practice?
My initial thought is if you already have good security hygiene, you're probably in a good position, but take control of the timeline. In our own experience, I believe we had a fairly mature network security policy and framework, but it still took about 5 months from engaging with the C3PAO to preparing our documents and collecting the evidence. As Matt mentioned, it seemed they gave themselves a high score because they were doing these things, but perhaps it sounds like collecting the evidence and documenting it may have been a challenge. And we had some of those same challenges of providing the proof that we were doing so. So it did take several months to do that. So I would say there's no better time to start now. Perform your self-assessment, get a gap assessment, get engaged with C3PO, and start preparing. If you're concerned that you may have a less mature network, I would offer, like my colleagues here said, do your data flow diagrams, establish your boundaries, and keep it simple. Figure out the simplest solution that will support the technical controls, support your business, make sure it scales with your business, make sure your framework allows for its own evolution. Well, it's not only scale with your business, but what if your business changes shapes? What if you take on new things? Can it accommodate that? And if it does, I think you've got a good plan. And I think to get there, establish good checklists, establish reusable policies, procedures, and that'll lead to easy planning, implementation, execution, evidentiary capture, and compliance.
Garrett, as an assessor, you have a different feel for this. So how should firms be preparing for going from on paper to in practice?
Certainly. I always tell organizations that we're working with that achieving the compliance, at least on paper, that's the easy part. Operationalizing the requirements where your people are actually doing it, what they say they're doing, that's the challenge. That's what takes time. That's what we go back to the training and just the maturity and kind of the best practices. Because as an assessor, when we're performing assessment of organization, one of the things we do is interview the stakeholders. That's one of the methods at our discretion to determine if a requirement is met. So, for example, we talked earlier about accidental CUI spillage. So that may fall under the incident response domain. And if I'm interviewing one of the team members that's part of the incident response team, and I say, okay, what happens when there is accidental CUI spillage? Your policy says XYZ happens, but you're telling me something totally different. And as an assessor, once there's discrepancies between what's written down versus what's coming out during the interviews or what's being shown in evidence, now that's a problem. We're going to be going down a rabbit hole, and it can just become a big issue, which could ultimately lead to a not met requirement. So it has to be lined up, and assessors are really good at identifying those discrepancies. And I always tell organizations, do not write down anything that you're not actually doing, because that's low-hanging fruit for the assessors to ding you on. If you say that we review our incident reports every 30 days, but when I'm doing an interview to the stakeholder who's responsible for doing that, and they say they do it once a year, okay, why is there a discrepancy here? It's not adding up. So yeah, do what you say you're doing and really focus on operationalizing it, and that continuous security awareness training is critical.
Sounds like it's pretty easy, but I'm sure it doesn't always happen. Matt, I want to get your perspective as well. I mean, obviously you're coming from a different place.
Yeah.
On paper, in practice, how do you make that transition?
Yeah, well, I think as Michael said, and you need to be thorough. I mean, that will come out in all of the paperwork and policies that have to be drafted. So you have to be very thorough, but try to keep it as simple as you can, because in the end, what that's going to lead to is better adoption, like Derek is pointing to, and making sure that people are doing what the SOPs and the policies state. But also when it comes to the training and training those individuals who may not be handling CUI, if you keep it a very simple as simple as possible process instead of steps, then it's easier for them to implement as well. If they should come upon CUI and have to report or whatever the case may be. So it's sort of that you've done the checklist, you put it, it's on paper, you know what you need to do, but try to keep it as clean as you can, and it just makes it easier for everybody else to contemplate and adopt.
I wanted to bring one more thing into it just because it sort of popped into my brain here. And Michael, I wanted to get your perspective on this just more generally, because we did talk about culture. How should leadership think about this stuff, particularly on the idea of bringing speed into CMMC compliance against the necessary rigor?
I think leadership does need to echo, like I mentioned earlier, that this is an investment. This is something we owe our customers, and it's worthy initiative, and it benefits our company. This is again rooted in best practices, so it is good for us, regardless of the industry, to establish rigorous cyber hygiene protocols and procedures.
And that's an excellent point, I think, to take us out on, just to sort of put a bow on the culture side of it. So, gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me today. It is really interesting and informative about how to make CMMC work on both sides.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.